Yeah, Dr. Wimsatt, if I remember correctly, earlier in the presentation you said that you really didn't advocate that people make ethical conclusions from science. It seemed like you just made some pretty strong ethical statements about what science tells us we should and should not do. Which seemed to suggest that this argument, it really is about the ethics, about what science is saying we should go, what we should do, which direction we as a society should go in. So I was wondering if you could maybe reconcile one of that inconsistency there.
Okay, that's an excellent question. By the way, I feel badly that I was as hard as I was on the last questioner because it's just the way this was set up, and somehow I got two questions in a row that seemed to suggest I was defending a side that I wasn't. But what I had in mind is something like this. In the late 19th century, we had a bunch of people who somehow got from Spencer an idea that Darwinism justified nature red in tooth and claw. That actually was a misreading of Darwin and too easy a move to moral conclusions from scientific premises. I'm not sure I want to say that there is no way to bring moral conclusions from scientific premises, from a greater study of what kind of organisms we are, what our culture is like, and so on. But I'm not in a hurry to do it. But the issue about paying attention to, say, the reports of the National Academy of Sciences is on just any grounds, on any instrumental grounds, good sense. What we have are, we're dealing with issues like, for example, energy use, about, at what time was the peak oil production reached in the world, according to the oil industry spokesman too. And we're not asking about how are we going to deal with reduced oil. The question is, it's going to come down. And the question is, how can we come down as easily as possible? These are instrumental issues dealing with straightforward physics and geophysics and other things. Now, could they be wrong? Yes, by some small amount. But it's not time now to say, well, let's just do another study and figure out. When there is a sufficiently severe threat, we need to be considering acting. Now, the issue about condom use, say, in Ghana. Ghana, 10 or 15 years ago had, I'm not absolutely sure of the figures on this, but let me try the numbers. It had something like 15% rate of AIDS. And that has now gone, with Ghana's very effective program, down to about 5%. More of the people who catch AIDS in Ghana are women who catch it in bisexual relations with their husbands. Their husbands, because of the social condition, have to spend months at a time away from them in big cities, and sometimes bad things happen. Okay. It turns out that condom use between married couples would save an enormous amount of lives there, probably more lives than would be lost by the young not conceived that way. And furthermore, the young that were conceived would have a bigger chance of being conceived and born without AIDS. So that's an area where I want to say scientifically, the current government policy is wrong.
Where do you see evolution going in the next 20 years? Like we've seen gene therapy and like the coding of the genome. Where are we going with evolution for you?
I'm not only am I not in a position to answer that properly. Let me say the following. To explain why I think anybody who tries to answer exactly where evolution will go in 20 years is probably doing something that, if they were really sensible and if they could be held responsible, they would not do. Before the Human Genome Project and all the sequencing projects started going, do you know how many genes we believe human beings would have roughly? 100,000 or so. Now, just how the sequencing is finished, we suddenly find that we may have 30,000 genes. We have fewer genes than rice, we have fewer genes than many plants. There have been so many surprises that have been coming out recently in terms of the sequencing projects and what we're discovering about it, which we have to reconcile to have a comprehensive theory of evolution. It's very, very hard to predict where it is all going to go. The areas that are, of course, what is much more easier to say is areas about which people are extremely excited nowadays. One of them, of course, is evolution at the molecular level, including evolution of the genome and the organization of the genome. Another thing that people are extremely interested in, which Paul alluded to a bit, is the connection between development and evolution, whether or not the fact that not all aspects of embryological development, the evolutionary story behind that is not completely understood, whether or not a little more work, particularly at the molecular level, along with theoretical model building will help. But those are the directions in which I think the field will go. I would not hazard a guess as to exactly what the details of evolutionary theory will look like in even 5 or 10 years from now, let alone 20. But it is true that the genomic era and the fact that we are now recognizing that we have to understand the protein complement of the cell, we have to understand the functional interactions and how they change over time. Not just the informational content, so to say, but what happens over time has to be understood. It's changing things very, very radically.
Dr. Nelson, so I'm just curious, we keep using these ideas of design and whatnot, and one of the things that I'd like you to address maybe is that given how I understand natural selection and whatnot to work, it would seem to me that the only things that we would see in the environment would appear to be designed. That is, perhaps we're seeing some sort of selection effect because the things that would appear to be not designed just would fail. Like we don't see people with teeth on their forehead or something, I guess I would be curious to see how you would respond to this idea of some sort of a selection effect going on, accounting for our perception of design.
Right. I guess if I understand your question correctly, natural selection is a kind of faux...
A filter.
A faux designer, to use the French adjective. In other words, it's building designoid, Dawkins' term, design-like systems, and in a sense mimicking the action of a real intelligent designer. Now notice what's sort of behind that, and that is that we clearly have interesting artifacts, strange objects, Jacques Monod called them, we wish to explain. Natural selection is a real process. My wife is a pediatrician, and she has a problem with prescribing antibiotics because, talk about problems that Bill mentioned, antibiotics are routinely abused by people. Bacterial populations are very large, and a lot of standing variation, and they swap genetic information with wild promiscuity. They go right around antibiotics now that were effective, let's say, 10 years ago. So I'm not denying the reality of natural selection. It's part of the toolkit of any working biologist. The question is, what can natural selection do? And I think, and this is something that I explored in my dissertation work with Bill, I think that there are structural properties, especially in animals, and the way that they're built, that the very mutations you need to affect large-scale change, to build a new body plan, let's say, are those that are least likely to be successful because of the way that development unfolds from the end to the adult. And natural selection, while it is a real process, may well be inherently limited in terms of what it can accomplish. So, I'd agree with you, natural selection does do things. It does fine-tune organisms. The question is it causally responsible for what Darwin thought it could do, namely building the complexity of life? And there I think there are real open questions. In fact, people that Bill and Sahotra interact with, like Stuart Kaufman, are not design theorists, they're not crazy philosophers like me. They're evolutionary theorists who've become disenchanted with neo-Darwinian theory and have their own real doubts about the efficacy of selection. So, thank you.